I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, helping the next generation of doctors.
My grandma was a nurse, so she inspired me to go into the medical field.
The San Diego program offering an academic boost to medical students who want to give back to their communities.
And the first Candidate Academy in Carlsbad offers to teach you how to become a political candidate. I'm Peggy Pico. What you get for your money and why ethics isn't part of the curriculum. Plus, California's workforce is more diverse and changing significantly. Why public policy isn't keeping up and what can be done to support San Diego workers.
People love the natural resources of Mission Bay. We have so many people who come here specifically to enjoy that. As soon as they hear about this project, they get excited.
A sweeping restoration at Mission Bay, introducing wetlands for the first time in decades. The two things it will need to survive. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. An executive shakeup has left the San Diego Union-Tribune with a new publisher. Tribune Publishing fired Austin Buettner, the man who led the charge to buy the paper. KPBS investigative reporter Mira Mesa says a veteran news executive will take over.
Tribune Publishing ousted Buettner, who was also the LA Times publisher, reportedly over poor profitability and costly hires from the political arena. On Facebook, Buettner said he and others had breathed new life into the organization while laboring under massive change in the industry. Tribune Publishing CEO Jack Griffin called incoming UT and LA Times publisher Tim Ryan one of the most accomplished publishing executives. Ryan previously worked as the publisher and CEO of the Baltimore Sun. He says he's committed to ensuring that both the UT and the LA Times continue their, quote, legacy of world-class journalism. Amita Sharma, KPBS News.
The Navy's historic swap on San Diego Bay continues. The USS George Washington took off today from Naval Air Station North Island. The carrier is part of a strike group swapping home ports as well as crews. Now, this crew has served on two ships named after presidents. USS Theodore Roosevelt will be their third when it docks later in San Diego. The crew created special patches, belt buckles to mark the three-ship service. Back to school for San Diego Unified and more than 100,000 students. A new school opened today named after the doctor who pioneered the polio vaccine. KPBS education reporter Matt Bowler says Jonas Salk Elementary welcomes students after decades of delays.
Oh my God, they're so precious.
It's the first day of school for the brand new school, and everyone is excited, especially Superintendent Cindy Martin.
How adorable.
Jonas Salk Elementary has room for up to 700 students and has classes through the 5th grade. This day was a long time coming. Construction was put on hold way back in the 1980s.
But I met a neighbor the other day who bought their house thinking that they were going to send their kindergartner to this school. And of course that kindergartner is now grown up, moved out of the house, gotten married, have family. The grandchildren are going to be lucky if they get to come to this school. So it did take a while to get this school built, but it's certainly one of our hallmarks.
School Board President John Lee Evans says environmental concerns were a major challenge.
Fairy shrimp are that weren't here before, but they're an endangered species, so then therefore the construction couldn't continue.
After more than 30 years, the school is finally finished. And San Diego Unified's Chief Facilities Planning and Construction Officer Lee Dolgoroff says this school is built to last.
The buildings are designed to a higher standard for resistivity to seismic events.
The 30-classroom school is designed to be a community center for a long time to come.
This school is designed to last between 50 and 100 years.
Maybe these kids will send their grandchildren there. Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
As a new class begins UC San Diego's medical school today, there are some students who didn't follow the traditional path to get there. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser says this next generation of doctors want to serve communities in need.
Kiana Chuloy has long known she wanted to be a doctor.
My grandma was a nurse, so she inspired me to go into the medical field. And so going into college, I knew that I wanted to go to medical school.
But Chuloy struggled her first 2 years of college, so when she graduated, she didn't have the grade point average to get into medical schools.
When I applied and didn't get in, I kind of felt immediately, I felt like giving up.
Instead, she went to the UC San Diego post-baccalaureate pre-medical program. The year-long program helped her and 27 other students who want to be doctors boost their academic records to get into medical school.
You want an opportunity to show a medical school that you can do strong work, and you would come out of the program with a 4.0, 3.9 GPA in our program that shows a medical school that you are on an upwards trajectory.
Miller says half of the students from the program are considered socioeconomically disadvantaged. The aim is to get students into medical school who want to work in underserved communities. That's true of Chuloy, who's originally from Hawaii and says the native population there doesn't get adequate medical care.
As a native Hawaiian myself, I feel the responsibility to go back home and bring back what I learned and serve the people there.
Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
A new center opened today in San Diego to help vets find medical care outside the VA. Tri-West Healthcare Alliance has a contract to match vets with private doctors and facilities after reports of problems accessing care through the VA. Company leaders say they're doing more than helping the agency end its backlog.
There's always areas where they don't have the capability inside the VA, so they need to buy it from outside for their veterans, or they have capacity problems because maybe they've lost a provider, maybe there's a surge in demand.
The company says they are seeing more veterans who want to see doctors outside the VA system. A new study shows major shifts in California's workforce. It's much more diverse than in past decades, but as Peggy Pico explains, public policies to support those changes have not kept up.
How California's workforce is changing and why state policy has to change with it. That's the title of a new report from the nonpartisan research group California Budget and Policy Center. My guest, Peter Brownell, research director at the Center for Policy Initiative, highlights some of those labor changes in the impact on San Diego workers and their families. And Peter, the report finds that California's workforce is a lot more diverse now than it has been in the past few decades. How does our workforce, as far as diversity go, compare to that of the 1980s?
Well, as you mentioned, it's become more diverse in terms of racial and ethnic groups. As a percentage of the workforce, the representation by Latinos has pretty much doubled in that period. It's a period of time where the workforce has become minority, non-Latino white. So there's been pretty significant changes over that time period.
What kinds of challenges do workers of colors experience in today's labor market as opposed to non-Latino or non-black workers?
Well, one of the things that the report mentions is that over that period of time, inflation-adjusted wages for both black and Latino workers have actually declined while they've grown for white workers. So both in terms of employment and wages, folks have really sort of struggled to remain attached to the labor market during the recession and to earn enough to support their families.
And something else the analysis looked at was more women are working today than they have since a surge into the workforce back in the 1970s. What effect is that having more women working and then working longer hours?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are the trends. And one of the other things that the report really highlights is that, we've reached a point where almost half of families with children under 5 have all adults in the household working. So obviously that's, there's huge implications for childcare and access to affordable quality childcare in preschools, to facilitate people to do that and to not have, negative impacts on their kids.
How does the labor force here in San Diego County compare to the rest of the state? Are we seeing similar results?
Yeah, we're seeing very similar changes in the demographics over the same period of time. There was a report from USC that tracked very similar changes in the population here. And because our younger population is even more made up of the racial and ethnic groups, including Latinos and Asian Pacific Islanders, we expect that change to continue as those folks age into the labor force.
Well, this report also looked at policies, right? Like changing policies and that they're not keeping up. What kind of policies need to be changed to address these changing workforce issues, especially here in San Diego?
Well, definitely in terms of the wages and the ability of wages to keep up with with inflation, one of the things two of the main policies that the report highlights are the need to continue to raise the minimum wage, even with the planned increases to $10 per hour. We're still adjusted for inflation going to be below where we were in terms of the purchasing power of minimum wage in 1968. So folks have seen their earning power eroded away if they're earning minimum wage, and that's obviously something that's that we've been debating here at the city, and will be at the city of San Diego, and will be on the ballot in the coming year. The other thing that the report highlights is earned income tax credit, which passed. There's a new state policy which is going to produce some very significant benefits for folks who are working but who have fairly low earnings.
Sure, yeah, I was going to touch on that. Can you just briefly explain how that works? People get an income credit that's actually pretty sizable. Yeah, it's basically the eligibility is very similar to the federal earned income tax credit, but this is coming from the state. It's a refundable credit, so people can get people will get a tax return based on that credit if they qualify for it and don't owe additional taxes. So it can put more money in their pockets. The thresholds are very low. So, for instance, even if you were working full-time year-round as a minimum wage worker supporting 3 children, you still wouldn't qualify. But for folks, there are about 2 million people that will qualify because of their part-time work and the needs of their dependents. In the state here in California, yeah. So super low-wage earners. So we'll have to end on this. But what about middle income? It seems like there's been a shrinking of middle-income jobs. Is that true? Yeah, I mean, we've seen sort of declines at where the median earnings are, and especially since the recession. I can say in San Diego that median earnings, median household income, declined during the recession and really have been stagnant since then. They haven't bounced back up the way the real estate market and the financial markets have. So folks are really sort of stagnating even at the median income in San Diego and as the report notes throughout the state. All right, something to follow up on that in the future. Peter Brownell, thank you so much. My pleasure.
The northern rim of San Diego's Mission Bay could be in for a major facelift. The Audubon Society is pushing to greatly expand the wetlands near Rose Creek. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson says it's an attempt to bring back habitat that used to dominate the area.
Rebecca Schwartz stands on a small overlook on the north rim of Mission Bay.
Right now it's low tide, so we can see a lot of the salt marsh. At high tide, this area would be inundated probably almost up to this fence line.
Condos push up against this sliver of wetland known as the Kendall Frost Marsh.
As we move through a little bit, we have a lot of what's called the low marsh. It's only exposed because it's low tide.
The long legs and beaks of herons and egrets allow them to gracefully navigate and feed on that muddy land.
We have some tidal channels that come in, so what looks like these little creeks running through here, that's where the bay water can come up and actually enter the marsh.
That tidal exchange alternately floods and drains the area, letting the marsh filter impurities out of the water, much like a kidney does for the human body. This protected and managed 40-acre wetland is all that's left of about 40,000 acres of marshy habitat that used to be Mission Bay. The bay became a recreational playground thanks to dredging in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Schwartz says this small marsh can no longer provide that kidney function.
This area of Mission Bay, we have closures sometimes. There's a lot of water quality issues in Mission Bay, and providing that functional benefit for water quality and water purification that wetlands provide would be a huge resource to the bay.
Schwartz wants to see the wetlands get bigger, so she's working on an effort called Rewild Mission Bay. The idea is to nearly quadruple the size of the marsh.
People love the natural resources of Mission Bay. We have so many people who come here specifically to enjoy that. As soon as they hear about this project, they get excited because it's an opportunity to have more engagement with this resource right in their own backyard.
It could end up being a massive undertaking. That's because this island of wetland habitat is surrounded by development and requires human intervention to survive. Jeff Crooks is a research biologist who works at the Tijuana River estuary.
Historically, this would have been a big, expansive marsh wetland in here, and now we have the little fragment that is the Kendall Frost Northern Wildlife Preserve.
Crooks says manufactured sand berms at the southern edge of the marsh help keep bay water from flooding out the area. The berms are needed because the marsh is starving for sediment that used to come from Rose Creek.
They need some sediment too. That's part of how marshes function, is they take sediment coming down the watershed and they trap it. And with things like sea level rise, what will happen is that the marsh will tend to accumulate sediment and grow in place.
But Rose Creek bypasses the marsh. The straight channel currently enters the bay between Campland and De Anza Cove. Leases for both those areas are expiring soon, and the people are expected to leave the area. That land could become part of a wetland restoration project, but it's not certain. Restoring Rose Creek requires some extensive engineering work, but Crooks remains optimistic.
I think we can reconnect habitats, but we can also reconnect people with nature, and that's an important part of this as well. We don't want to just block this place off.
The Audubon Society's Jim Pugh holds high hopes for the project. He stands on the edge of Crown Point Beach and peeks over a short fence.
It's such an invigorating thing to watch.
Pugh sees an island of ecological diversity.
The mud is just alive with little things, and so, there's a huge food chain that develops, and the part that we see the most, is the birds and the crabs and things like that.
A bigger marsh means a bigger way station for birds navigating the Pacific Flyway. Pugh calls this project a rare opportunity to reclaim wetlands that have been decimated by development.
They have a huge and productive niche, and we need to make sure we keep that around. Otherwise, we'll lose hundreds of species. And some of the bird species actually move from one to the other.
The California Coastal Conservancy is paying for the nearly $500,000 study to explore restoration options. 18 federal and state agencies are offering their support. And the Audubon Society's Rebecca Schwartz says many of those groups have offered to help with funding once the planning is done in 2 years. That's important because Schwartz says the sweeping restoration effort could cost tens of millions of dollars. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
She's out of jail tonight, a Kentucky county clerk who refused to issue marriage licenses to gay couples. Kim Davis spent 5 days behind bars. She cited her faith when she stopped issuing licenses after the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriages in June. Today, a federal judge lifted the contempt order against her, saying he was satisfied her deputies were granting marriage licenses. He also warned Davis not to interfere again. A radical reform for the end of Catholic marriages. Today, Pope Francis simplified the process for an annulment. This is a much-needed step for Catholics who want to remarry. The policy change overhauls a 3-centuries-old practice. The pontiff's decision comes just weeks before his first ever visit to the U.S. San Diego's Museum Council has again rejected membership of a creation museum located in Santee. KPBS culture reporter Angela Carone says the museum did not get the required votes to be granted membership.
The Creation and Earth History Museum was denied membership in 2013. They got a list of improvements to make before reapplying. Creation Museum President Tom Cantor says they spent 2 years making those changes. But when their new application went to the council membership last week for a vote, Cantor says they were denied again.
Which to me confirms the underlying cause that we suspected all along, which is prejudice against creation as an explanation for origins.
40 local museums belong to the council. The group's president, Carrie Fox, says the Creation Museum satisfied the requirements for membership, but didn't get the 21 yes votes needed.
I can't give specific reasons. I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of any individual museums as to how or why they voted or what their reasons were. I can just share that as a group, the San Diego Museum Council did not vote to admit them.
Membership in the council comes with marketing support and training. Cantor says the Creation Museum averages 35,000 visitors a year. Angela Carone, KPBS News.
Save the date. Next year's San Diego County Fair starts June 3rd. Of course, the final day for the festival of food, rides, and entertainment is always on Independence Day. Now, the inspiration for next year's fair, though, is from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The theme, Mad About the Fair. Well, if you want to run for public office, now may be the best time to find out how to do it. Peggy Pico explains how to get your name on the local ballot.
The Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce will host its first Candidate Academy in October. The $149 course includes subjects like how to set up a campaign team, secure endorsements, and identify regional issues. Here with a preview is Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce Executive Vice President Tony Padron and Jason Rowe, San Diego Republican campaign strategist for Mayor Kevin Faulconer. And Tony, why offer this 4-week course?
We want to prepare folks. We want them to know that they can run for office, that it's not this big scary monster they've thought it's always been. So we want to give them those tools, the resources, and make it as easy as possible for them.
Give us a little bit more of an idea of what the curriculum's like.
We're looking at fundraising. It's one of the hardest things for folks to do is ask for money. We're looking at messaging. What is the message you want to get across? Who do you want to deliver it to? What do you want them to know about you?
And there's more?
Yeah.
Okay, probably a lot more. Let me ask you this. Is this academy, though, geared toward a particular party or candidates with business interest?
Nope. This is a nonpartisan training for anyone that is interested in being an elected official.
Okay. And Jason, you'll be on the panel for the nuts and bolts of running a campaign. What are the most important considerations, do you think, for someone who's new to politics who maybe wants to run a campaign?
Well, I do think what's important about this is the demystifying of the process, and people understand you don't need to hire people like me in order to do this. You can do a lot of this yourself. You know, first is how do you make sure that you get on the ballot, that you make sure you comply with the laws as it relates to fundraising and how you spend the money. Those are two things that I think that are very important to get out of the way straight away. But then I think it's how do you effectively use whatever time you can contribute towards your campaign. You know, a lot of these candidates are going to be people that have a 9-to-5 job. They've got a profession and they're doing this in addition to. How do they spend the 10, 15, 20 hours a week that they have to devote to this in the most impactful way to help their candidacy be effective?
And Jason, you've run campaigns before. What do you think makes someone a good political candidate?
You know, I think being able to communicate with people, whether it is to large groups of people, small groups of people, one-on-one. Not everybody that does this, believe it or not, actually likes people. Liking people would be very helpful. I mean, you look at politicians like Bill Clinton, who are just naturally very talented at this. But I think being able to find a way to connect and find some common threads between you and the voters really helps. And I think the more involved you are in your local community, the easier it is to get people to vote for you.
I see. Now, Tony, I noticed there's not a section on ethics in this course. How come?
We're looking at that as the next step. When we start doing actual leadership training. The Chamber has held in the past a university where we actually do leadership training. We look at what are the qualities, not just qualifications, of good leadership. And what does that look like? What do people need to be better leaders? And a lot of it has to do with confidence. A lot of it has to do with just learning basic skills about speaking publicly, being a good writer, being a good communicator. Mm-hmm. So that's the next step. Right now, we want to give people the nuts and bolts of how to get involved in running for office.
And Jason, why do you think it's important for the average citizen, the non-career politician, to want to run for office,
Well, I think everyone comes from a different experience, whether it's professional or just with the life that they've lived. And so I think everyone has a different perspective that they can contribute in how we're all governed, whether it is at your local city level, your county level, state or federal. You know, the people that are making these decisions impact you, your neighbors, your family. I think it's important that we have a diversity of perspective on how we do that. And I think, being active in your community and having an understanding of the things that make your community work really qualifies you in a lot of ways to be an elected representative in your local government.
All right. And Tony, how many people will be accepted to this? I guess what's the process and, as far as for the criteria for acceptance?
We're looking for 20 participants. We feel that that's the best number when you want them to be able to interact with our presenters and our speakers. We want them to interact with each other because, again, that's one of the skills they need to learn is to how to interact in public. We're putting folks through an application process. We want them to fill out the application, tell us about themselves, and pay a fee, because that's part of running for office is to go through a process. So we're hoping to get at least 20 right from the get-go. We've got about 12 right now. Okay. So we've extended the deadline to September 15th.
That's what I was going to ask, September 15th. All right. Well, we've got more information about the Candidate Academy on our website, kpbs.org. Tony Padron and Jason Rowe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, how one gourmet chef is cooking up a way not to waste food. That's Tuesday on the PBS News Hour.
Calling all thrill seekers, California's longest zip line ride is now open in La Jolla. The ride at the La Jolla Indian Reservation opened just in time for the Labor Day holiday weekend. The cables stretch out to more than a mile long. Tribe members say profits from tickets could help fund cabins, housing, and eventually a small casino. A September scorcher on tap for San Diego. A heat advisory covers the beaches and valleys until tomorrow night. Above normal temperatures in the 80s by the coast, mid to upper 90s for the inland valleys. Bracing for thunder and lightning, flash flood watch for the mountains and desert until Thursday night, 80s in the mountains and triple digits in the desert. Here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Midday Edition, the proposed waterfront naval complex downtown clears another legal hurdle. What the revised complex could look like, that's tomorrow on KPBS Radio. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.